Hello everybody, and welcome to the second part of the multi-part tutorial for learning asynchronous sockets. Again, this is just a basic socket system meant to explain how sockets work and stuff, and how I feel is the best way to use sockets. But I do want to admit right now that all this code is not really well written. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could go wrong and things like that. For example, you should always check to make sure that your socket connection is still good before you do anything with your socket. You should, check to see if it's null. You should check to see if there's any socket errors and stuff like that. And in order to do that, you can actually, checking if it's null is pretty simple. If it's not null, then go ahead and keep running. If it is, then do whatever. Checking to see if there's an error is, again, pretty simple. You can't do it with the accept, but you can do it with the receive. And in order to do that, you add it into your end receive. And what will happen is you'll get the buffer size, and SE will, it'll out your socket error. And then you can say if socket error does not equal socket error dot success. So if it's not a success, then quit running the code, or whatever you want to do. I mean, there's different ways you could do it, but I'm just basically saying that this code is not well written. I mean, it'll work, but there's going to be some problems from time to time with it. For example, I can already tell you right now, I don't have any functionality for disconnecting. So if a client connects and then disconnects, an exception is going to get thrown. So that's just like a little heads up of what's going on. So with that, basically the server socket system is done. But in order to receive any data, we have to have a client. So let's begin with the client. So I'm going to add a new project. I'm going to name it client. It's going to be a console application. And unfortunately I have an error because I went ahead and made sure everything was okay before I did this tutorial. So you shouldn't have that error that I just had. So once again, we immediately start with the socket system, so we make a networking folder. But instead of server socket, yep, that's right, I'm going to call it client socket. I will be using system.net and system.net.sockets. You may or may not use system. I do, because I like what system has. I like to, log everything that happens, so I generally always keep system as a usable reference. So now that we have that, same concept, you gotta have a socket to work with, and you will indeed need a buffer, just like the server. There are a few differences, which I'll get into as I go along. But for now, you just keep doing the same thing you did before. So the difference between a client and a server is that a server accepts connections. It has to listen and bind itself to a port, and then it begins accepting connections. a client does not have to listen or bind itself because it's not accepting any connections, so it doesn't need to listen for any connections or be bound to a socket. It just goes for the connection, straight up. So we'll have a method called connect, and it will take an IP address in the form of a string and a port. And then you begin connecting. And for the state, you can go ahead and put null. And for the callback, go ahead and make your callback. You know, same concept as a server, and if you don't remember what callbacks are, basically what it's saying is once you call connect, it begins connecting to this IP endpoint, and once it has connected, it will call this method and pass this object. That's in a nutshell what it means. And if you need more info on callbacks, you can rewatch tutorial number 1 because I explained it perfectly fine. In fact, I may have even just explained it better than the first one, so you know, that's up to you. But once you have this and you're connected, you can do one of two things. You can send data or begin receiving data. You know, just for good measure, I will begin receiving data, and it asks for a buffer. And, you know, a lot of this stuff is just exactly like before. It's pretty much exactly like the server, except it's a little bit different. The only difference between the server and the client is because you're not like really doing multiple connections at once, you don't have to, you know, have a separate socket to keep the connection to pass around. You only need just that one socket that we made, and that's a good thing. Kind of, you know, less stuff to work with, but if you don't understand what I mean, you'll get it in a second. That's basically all there is to it for the client. And to prove to you that this works, I'll implement it in I forgot to mention that the reason we're using 127.0.0.1 instead of IP address.any is because you need to specify an IP address. Like, you can't just connect to any IP address. You have to know where this server is. And 127. Whatever is a shortcut for saying connect to this computer. It's your local computer or local host. So, to show you I know what I'm doing, I'll try to start this up, and it's not going to throw an error for whatever reason. I don't really know why. Or it does. Oh no, because I forgot to keep that loop in there. So, you'll run this. Sorry. This is the server. You'll run the client and it'll try to connect. It claims it connected to a server, but as you can see, an exception got thrown instantly because it's just not possible. I don't know why it says it connected. Here's one of those things I mean by implementing in checks. Because there's a lot of stuff that could go wrong. And that was one of them. But now you should see that it could not connect. That's just basic error checking, you see what I'm saying? So once we run the server, you'll see that it'll connect just fine. Here's the server. Start the client up. See it connected to the server. And there's no exceptions, which means it has a connection. But I'll show you what I mean again by error checking. As soon as I disconnect the client, boom, exception, because I am not checking to make sure it's still connected, and I can't, I'm not handling that right, so it doesn't know what to do, panics and throws an exception. So I'm not going to get into that because that requires a lot more time to put that in there. Just remember that you need that in there. But yeah, so now we need to handle the packet if we get one. And I'll be working on the server for this one first. So yeah, basically what you need is a packet handler, and I make my own class for this, and I name it, packet handler. And you'll want to make this a static class because you're not going to need to initialize like any constructors or anything. It's just going to be a straight up, one use kind of class. And you're obviously going to be handling a packet, but not only that, you're going to be handling the user socket. And the reason for that is because if we go back to the server socket and we do packet, damn it, and we pass it the packet and pass it the socket. I mean, if we don't pass it the socket, we can't use it anymore because this socket is just being used for listening and accepting connections. Once we get the connection, we create a new socket out of it right here. And this is the connection between you and that client. So that's why we need to keep passing it around so we can use it. So, Anyway, once we've passed it, now we can start handling it. The first thing I want is to let myself know, hey, I received a packet. The length And because with my personal packets, I've been, how I learned packets was because of a private server, and so I'm really used to how they structure their packets, and I find it really nice. So I always include a packet type, and a lot of people do that because you kind of have to. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, like, this is what I do. I forgot to mention one thing. In order to get data from a byte, there's a great class called bit converter. So what I do is this. A uint 16 is the same as an u short, by the way. But what I do is I write my packet, I write the length and then the type. And a u short is 2 bytes. So, if it reads the packet length, it'll start at 0, it'll read 0 and read 1. And then the packet type will start at 2, read it, and then read 3. And then, so yeah, that's just how it kind of works. I'll include a list of how many bytes each thing uses. But for now, that's just how the basic, kind of how my thing works. So yeah, that's kind of what that is. And this will give me, it'll say, hey, blah, 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 this is that. I know I'm probably really confusing right now, but you'll see. So now that I can grab the packet length and the packet type, and it'll tell me, we'll send a test packet with the client. So you want to go to the client program.cs, and what you actually might want to do is, just for, a nice little test, have it read forever, read the console forever, but every time you hit enter, you know what, never mind. Go into the client socket and do this. Once you've connected to the server and you've begin receiving, go ahead and make a little packet. And to do that, remember what I said, a packet is just a byte array. I'm just going to have mine be 4. And what I'm going to do is I'll use bit converter. I'm sorry, I'm doing things a really complicated way because I haven't explained packet structures yet. So basically what this is doing is you're making a new packet. This is the total size of it. You are getting the bytes of your packet length and storing it. You're doing the same with whatever type you're using. And then you copy it. You copy the packet length into the first two spots of your packet. And then you're copying the packet type into spots 2 to 4. See, you're copying the packet type starting at the beginning into your packet starting at spot 2, and you're only copying 2 bytes. Now we can actually send that. So we'll start the server. And then we'll start the client. And as you can see, it received a packet, and indeed we made a new packet of 4. We wrote the packet length, and then we wrote the type, and we've now dissected it on the server. So that's just a really basic how packets work. I know I haven't really done a lot in this tutorial except for do the client and kind of make sure it's working right. But in the next tutorial, it's going to be getting a lot easier, I would say, because as you can tell, doing all this for one packet is pretty stupid, and it's kind of a lot of work, especially if you have a lot of packets going in and out, and you have a lot of types of packets. And there's so much easier ways that you could do this. So in the next tutorial, I will be focusing on the ways to make it easier to get a structured packet set up and to make packets themselves using classes and not using byte arrays at a time and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of it. And with that, I'll end this tutorial.